Safety first is rarely the theme when talking football at the SEC level, but safety is first for the SEC Breakdown crew as we kick off our positional breakdown series. And welcome to SEC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night. It's 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock in the Central Time Zone. We got Mike Laval on board with Last Word on Sports, also David Waters and myself, Mark Rogers, to talk SEC football. And boys, we've been talking about this for the last several weeks, looking at positional units across the SEC and looking at the best players across the board in both divisions. And we start at safety. Mike, would love to hear your top five.
Mark, thanks for having me. Mark, I really like the safety position. I really like the strong safety position. It's my favorite position on the entire defensive side of the football, so I'm really excited to talk about the safeties. I think the SEC has a deep field of safeties returning. I think safeties are underrated. They play second fiddle to the cornerbacks, so I'm really looking forward to diving into the position of safety. So I'll just start it off. I think the best returning safety in the entire league, and this is going to surprise a few people, is Jonathan Ford, free safety out of Auburn. 6'1", 205 pounds. Ford had 118 tackles last season, number 3 in the SEC. For a free safety, that's pretty good. 68 solo tackles, also number 3 in the SEC. He did contribute one sack, 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles. I think what he did for the Auburn defense was kept that defense alive. They had some struggles. He was asked to do a lot of stuff, both in the pass defense and run stopping, which is critically important for those safeties. That versatility that you see, the safeties these days have to be able to play the run and play the passing game, which is what separates the safety from the cornerback position. So I looked at Jonathan Ford for his ability to defend the pass on the deep end of the field and to come up and do some run stopping. I think he was asked to do a lot more than he should have with that Auburn defense last year. Coming in at number 2, not going to surprise anybody, Eddie Jackson out of Alabama, 6 foot 195, third team All-American last year with the Associated Press, 46 tackles, 6 interceptions. If you look at Jonathan Ford and Eddie Jackson, they almost kind of have the roles reversed. Ford, the free safety, had 118 tackles, and Jackson, the strong safety, had 6 interceptions. I think that's because of the schemes they play and the defenses they had. A lot of teams, when they look at Alabama, they know they're not going to have the time to throw deep because of that fierce defensive front and the pass rush. So they focus a lot on crossing routes and underneath routes, which is where Eddie Jackson just devoured quarterbacks last year. So as a strong safety, he came in with 6 interceptions and really was the attitude guy in that defensive secondary for Alabama last year. Set the tone leadership-wise. And so they're very happy to have him back this year. Coming at number 3, somebody David's going to be able to tell us a lot about, Marcus May, 6'1", 210, prototypical size for a strong safety. I really like this guy. There were only 4 defensive backs in the top 15 of the SEC in tackles last year. He was at number 15 with 79 tackles. Again, in that strong safety spot, you have to be so versatile. He is versatile. He has the speed and the size. He can play anywhere from a nickelback to an outside linebacker. That's how versatile he is. 2 interceptions, 5 forced fumbles to go along with those 79 tackles in 2015. Also a USA Today All-American returning. For number 4 and number 5, I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going with teammates. Number 4, Dominick Sanders out of Georgia, and number 5, Quincy Mulger out of Georgia. Georgia had the nation's best pass defense last year at 156 yards per game. That's pretty impressive, even playing in what many consider a run-first conference in the SEC. Dominick Sanders had 48 tackles, 6 interceptions, a sack, and 5 tackles for losses. That's impressive, contributing across the board from his free safety position. A lot of speed there. He can close across the field to make the tackles or to prevent those deep passes. And his backfield buddy back there, Quincy Mulger, 6'1", 200. Again, prototypical size for that strong safety. 58 tackles, 3.5 tackles for losses, 5 QB pressures, and 5 pass blocks. Those 2 guys manning the back end of Georgia's defense did everything beyond the line of scrimmage, on the deep end, short routes. They really set the tone for the nation's best pass defense. And I think that earns them the number 4 and number 5 spots of safeties coming back this year. That's really going to be big for Georgia's defense coming back into this year. I think it's going to cause opposing coaches a lot of scheme nightmares as they prepare to face the Bulldogs. So again, I'm excited to talk about safeties, the versatility, the energy they bring, those hard hits, and I think this is deep class, but those are my top 5 coming back.
I think that the SEC has distinguished itself in a number of areas in being the dominant conference that it's been over the last 10 to 15 years in college football, and one of those positions is safety. I think it's also corner, and it's D end and outside linebacker. I think it's the rush end and outside linebacker position as being able to cover the field with more players than any other conference in the country from sideline to sideline, but I also think its ability to man up in the secondary at corner and then bring a athletic but also physical style to the safety position where the SEC has separated itself. Sometimes these top 5 discussions become a little bit cut and dry, but based on Mike's top 5, I'm going to say that I have 3 of the 5, so I've got a couple other guys to throw in there as well. So, David, let's go to you for your top 5 in the SEC at safety.
And Mark, I'll back you up on some of those comments you made about the safety position. I think another thing I like about the safety position in the SEC is we see a lot of these guys. If you look at them, they could be linebackers in a lot of other leagues. It's like you said, they can man up, they can play in the box, and that leads to I think high tackle numbers like Mike pointed to for some of these guys, and they're not afraid to stick their nose in. To stop those big running backs in the SEC. I'll start. We start with number 1. I'll go Eddie Jackson. He converted last year. I thought that was kind of neat. He was a cornerback that converted to safety, and he excelled in his first season. He was hesitant to move at first, but he erased all doubts last season. I think it'd be interesting to see how he adjusts without Kirby Smart and Mel Tucker there. But and Mike alluded to how well Georgia did with Jeremy Pruitt last year in their pass defense. Jeremy Pruitt's now coming over to Bama. That probably won't really hurt his production at all. I don't think he'll skip a beat, and this is still Saban's defense as well. He's a little smaller than Bama safeties in the past, like Clinton Dix, Mark Barron, Landon Collins. But I think probably made him number 1 for me was he set a school record for 230 interception return yards. So when he gets his hand on the ball, as that safety position does, he makes something happen with it after that. We saw it in the national championship game against Clemson. He's a playmaker with the ball in his hands on the defensive side. Number 2, I'll go Dominick Sanders. Mike mentioned he had 6 best SEC best 6 interceptions. In his first 2 years as the Bulldog, he started 25 of 26 games, and he's racked up 9 interceptions in those 2 years. I found a stat online from Stats LLC. He picked off 6 of those passes last year while only being thrown out 38 times. That's give him an interception rate of 16.2% per target. That was the highest interception target rate of all safeties in the Power 5 conference with 30 targets or more. So it was, he made the most of what little chance he got. And so he helped anchor that Georgia secondary, and he returns to with Quincy Mulger to anchor that down. Number 3, I think Mike had him at number 3 as well. I'll go Marcus May for Florida. He's a fantastic athletic prospect. He like Mike said, he's the prototypical in what you look for in a size and everything for a safety. He routinely ranked among the best in the nation by Pro Football Focus for the coverage that he did. But I think I watch Florida a lot closer than a lot of people. There's tour teams late in the season from Alabama and Michigan where he just let some big plays happen. Probably got me from bumping him up a little bit, but the other 2 guys were pretty good in their own right. But I couldn't put him above those guys just because those big plays stick out in my head. His physical style seems to lend itself to playing in the box sometimes, but he didn't really get to do that with Keanu Neal at Florida the last 2 years. So I think we'll see him fill that role more this year, and he'll be able to play both safety positions if he needs to. And CBS Sports has May as the second best free safety prospect going into the 2017 NFL Draft, only behind Notre Dame's Max Redfield. Number 4, I'll have Jonathan Ford. Mike mentioned his crazy 118 tackles. And especially in the SEC, experience and leadership mean a lot, and he has a lot of it. He's a multi-year starter. Can help Auburn with that new defense they're coming in with this year. So Kevin Steele will be probably that 4-2-5 system is what we're seeing now, and he'll probably be asked to play some nickel as well. So, he established himself as a leader at the nickel position in the spring, but he can go safety if need be. He's ranked number 3 in CBS's free safety for NFL 2017 NFL draft for next year. And number 5, I have Jamal Adams from LSU. He was a sophomore last year, had 67 tackles, team high 4 interceptions. He's the playmaker in that LSU secondary, and he's a forced fumble recovery. And I would say he's the biggest playmaker over Tre'Davious White, which is, those guys are, for LSU's defense, they're sitting there, can make some plays. I think it'd be interesting to see how when they bring Dave Aranda in, switching from a 4-3 to a 3-4, I think that, lends itself for LSU to bring more pressure up front and maybe for him to make some more plays in the back end. He's athletic enough to play safety and cornerback. He's a ball hawk that can bring a takeaway-minded presence to the new LSU defense.
All right, so to size up the top 5 for David and Mike, basically, so we've got 4 of the 5. So Mike went with Quincy Mauger at 5, Dominick Sanders at 4, Marcus May at 3, Eddie Jackson at 2, and Jonathan Ford at 1. David goes with Jamal Adams at 5, the one the one that differed from Mike's list. Ford at 4, May at 3, Sanders at 2, and Jackson at 1. All right, so I'm going with this list, and I'm starting at number 5 with a player that's not been mentioned yet, Texas A&M's Armani Watts, 126 total tackles. So when the safety makes tackles, we know that's a good thing that he actually got the guy to the ground. We know that speaks to the defensive lapses, and for Texas A&M, that's been obvious since they've come over from the Big 12. This has not been a good defense, and it leaves it up to the safety to be the last man standing and make the tackle. It also speaks to a lot of plays on the field, so long drives create more opportunities as well for anybody on the defense to make tackles. So sometimes when you're making a lot of tackles, it means you're out there for 12 and 13 play drives. So Armani Watts making the tackle, so expect those tackle numbers, hopefully for A&M fans, to come down. But he did wrap 126 tackles. That led the SEC. 6 tackles for loss. He has 4 career interceptions. And as a side note, has 10,000 people following him on Twitter. Coming into his senior season, expect a big season out of Armani Watts. Okay, at number 4 and 3, going with Mike's tag team deal at Georgia, the number 1 pass defense in college football last season, which also speaks to the opposition for the Georgia Bulldogs to a certain extent last year. I've got Quincy Mauger at 4. I've got Dominick Sanders at 3. So for me, Mauger, 52 tackles, 10 tackles for loss at safety. He had 15 quarterback hurries. He got into the backfield. They had him rushing the passer quite a bit. Quincy Mauger, I've got at number 4. My number 3 player is Dominick Sanders out of Georgia. As a sophomore last year, 48 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, led the SEC, tied with Eddie Jackson, who got the extra games played in the college football playoff, led the SEC in interceptions with 6, now has 9 career interceptions. This is a guy that if you read into his story, he lost his dad to a drug overdose at the age of 6, and he says even though he didn't know his dad that well, that motivates him. That's something that he not only takes with him to the playing field on game day, but also in practice, that's a motivating factor. He thinks about it every day to play for his dad. This kid is extremely tough and was just a 3-star coming out of high school. Dominick Sanders I've got out of Georgia at number 3. All right, I give this guy a little bit more status than you two. Jamal Adams out of LSU. I think the guy's a freak of an athlete. Some of the great LSU defensive backs of recent years, Tyrann Mathieu in particular, have said that this guy can be a legendary LSU defensive back. He was just a sophomore last year, second team All-SEC, had 10 tackles against Bama, 63 tackles total, 5.5 tackles for loss, 4 picks, as David mentioned, 10 passes defensed, and he's pretty popular on Twitter with 23,000 people following him. Jamal Adams, freak athlete, physical player in the secondary at the safety position. All right, that leaves me with Eddie Jackson. I started this process thinking I was going to rate Jamal Adams just based on the eyeball test at number 1, but the superlatives for Eddie Jackson and the production just can't be denied. The pick in the national championship game, as David mentioned, 6 total, as you both mentioned, 9 career. What was impressive about this kid is he had his heart set on playing cornerback at Alabama. they saw the need for him to switch to safety. He didn't feel fully comfortable or confident in making that transition, but Nick Saban and the coaching staff saw it in him, and he's made it work to the nth degree. Second-team All-American, first-team All-SEC. Had some knee surgery this offseason, but should be ready to go. Was actually able to get on the field for the last couple spring sessions. So Eddie Jackson, I have at number 1. So Jackson at 1 for me, Adams out of LSU at 2, Sanders and Mauger, the Georgia pair, 3 and 4. Armani Watts shows up on my list at number 5. Mike, I know that this was a difficult task for you. You said off the top that you love this position. You love the combination of athleticism and what they're asked to do in the running game. So I know that you had your eyes on a few other guys as well.
Yeah, Mark, I thought there were about 7 guys that could have been anywhere between 1 and 7 on this list. I like Armani Watts, 126 tackles, like you said. I dinged Watts a little bit because of the defensive scheme he was in. Teams passed less against A&M than they passed against Auburn. They ran far more against A&M than they ran against Auburn. Here's the other thing about A&M. It's not Watts' fault, but you look at that front line for A&M, Myles Garrett, Deshaun Hall, and Dylan Mack they had last year. That's about 40 tackles for loss. There is no reason Armani Watts should have had 126 tackles. No reason whatsoever. Auburn asked Jonathan Ford in their scheme to play much more of a hybrid safety than a true free safety. Armani Watts is really playing a true free safety position and still has 126 tackles. So I kind of dinged Watts because of his teammates. I don't think he was asked to make 126 tackles. You're absolutely right about Jamal Adams. Another guy, I actually had him at 6 and Watts at 7. But either one of those guys really could have been 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Jamal Adams is a great athlete, but I kind of dinged him a little bit because he's surrounded by other great athletes on that LSU defense. At 7, I think a guy we didn't talk about that could also be anywhere in the top 7 is Brandon Bryant out of Mississippi State. I talked about the 2 Georgia safeties and about how they did a little bit of everything. Bryant was the same way. Had 63 tackles, 2 sacks, and 3 interceptions. A little bit underrated because he's over there in Mississippi State, but you know they lost a lot of talent on defense, and for him to keep that production, I thought was pretty impressive. I think he's flying under the radar, and I think he's got a chance to be first or second team All SEC at the end of this season. I think there's really 7 top level safeties in the league, and I think 8 top level safeties in the league. Brandon Bryant being the 8th. I think you also need to look at the only 2 other guys I'll mention is Todd Kelly Jr. out of Tennessee, and here's my wild card: Tony Connor, highly rated Ole Miss guy, had a really good 2014 season. Got injured in 2015, but in the 5 games that he did play before and after his first injury and before his second injury, really didn't have the production people thought he was going to have. If he's back and if he's healthy and if he plays like he played in 2014, he could end up in the top 5 of this list at the end of the season. So I really have him as a wild card. Todd Kelly Jr. started midway through the season last year but came on strong, really played a vital role as a young guy in that Tennessee defense. He's going to be surrounded by a lot of talent. He could end up on this list at the end of the season, too. So those are my 2 wild cards, Tony Connor and Todd Kelly. But I think the SEC is really deep in safeties, and I love the strong safety position.
And that was going to be my question, actually, for both of you guys to size up the safety position for your respective teams, if you guys can bring that. David, your thoughts about the Gators at safety? And I know you had another guy or 2 that you were eyeing at safety that you wanted to try to squeeze into the top 5.
But most of that was Quincy Mauger, but you guys hit on him. You know, I would just be interested to see the new regime change with Kirby Smart, Mel Tucker, how that comes about. He's played 39 games for Georgia. I think that tops the roster, at least on the defensive side of the ball. So the experience is there. And I was really high on him last year. He didn't disappoint. So it was, Quincy Mauger back there with Dominick Sanders is just really probably. Those 2 guys together, both of you guys have both of them in your top 5, probably anchors the best secondary, one of the best secondaries, definitely at the safety position in the SEC. I'll go with Florida. We mentioned Marcus May, what he can do. Probably Nick Washington as the other safety spot. He's actually from here in Jacksonville, played at Trinity Christian High School. But he hasn't had a lot of playing time. I think he would definitely start the season at the other safety spot. It would be interesting to see how long he hangs on to it. He seems to he'll stick his head in. He'll get the tackle, but he'll let the pass plays go by him a good bit. But it was a big 5-star recruit, that Chauncey Gardner, coming in, who really impressed in the spring. He is one of the most athletic guys Florida will have on the defensive side of the ball. He can play cornerback. He can play safety. But it really looks like Florida's going to stick him in at safety and just let him be that big physical presence that Florida's been known for back at the safety position. So I'm ready to see what Chauncey Gardner can do. He'll get plenty of playing time. He may not start beginning of 2016 season, but he'll get plenty of playing time. And if Nick Washington doesn't step his game up a little bit, I don't think it would take long for Chauncey Gardner to come in and take that spot away from him.
Hey, Mike, I was pulling up the top 5, my personal top 5 list from 2015, and I had I knew I had Tony Connor in the mix there, Jamal Adams, Brian Randolph, Jalen Mills, and Quincy Mauger going into last season. How did the Vols look at safety? I know you mentioned a few guys already.
Well, I think they're looking pretty good. They lost Brian Randolph and Daryl McNeil, but now safety's a perfect example of how the Butch Jones era is starting to pay off in Knoxville right now. We lose 2 guys who were instrumental back there, 2 starters, but now we're seeing the depth that Butch Jones has been able to recruit at Tennessee. Ty Kelly Jr., I think, is going to start at strong safety. I think he's going to be really good. He had a couple interceptions last year and really held that position down late in the season. But you also got Rashawn Golden, who is moving positions. He was a nickelback last year. He looked good in the spring practice, so I think you'll see him. You'll see him play in some run defense support. I think you'll see him spell Ty Kelly Jr. They're both going to get plenty of playing time. On the back end, I think you're going to see Micah Abernathy and Evan Berry. If you remember, Evan Berry had a 100-yard interception return against Northwestern in the bowl game to finish Tennessee's season last year. Also had 3 returns for touchdown. So like David was talking about with Eddie Jackson, once Evan Berry gets his hands on the football, at any point on the field, it could be a touchdown the other way. Of course, Evan Berry, the younger brother of All-American and Ball for Life Eric Berry. So he's got the family genes there. But I think Evan Berry and Micah Abernathy will also both see time at free safety. So I think Tennessee's sitting good at safety, and I think it's just one position that indicates the return on Tennessee's investment with Butch Jones. We actually have some depth, some quality and talented depth at safety position. I think all 4 of those guys, either one at either position, either Golden or Kelly at strong safety and Abernathy and Berry at free safety, have the talent to start in the SEC.
Since we've knocked out the safeties, I think next we go to the cornerback position, the glamour boys there. But just to possibly catch some guys that we missed at the safety position and also preview some of the guys that we're going to consider for next week. Minkah Fitzpatrick, obviously a cornerback for Alabama, had 2 sacks, 2 picks, both brought back for touchdowns, 11 pass breakups. Donovan Wilson at A&M had 8.5 tackles for loss and 5 picks. Carlton Davis at Auburn, just a sophomore this season, so as a freshman, 56 tackles, 3 picks. Trey Matthews, elder statesman there at Auburn, coming into his junior season, had a couple picks last year. Tony Bridges at Mississippi at Ole Miss, coming into his senior season to consider. No, Mike, you brought up Brandon Bryant. His stats from last year: 3 interceptions, 1 brought back all the way for a touchdown, 59 tackles. You mentioned Todd Kelly. He had 3 picks last year. Ladarius McNeil out of Tennessee, 31 tackles, 2 picks as well. You got, of course, Torrin McGaster at Vandy. Vandy, despite not winning many games except for the James Franklin era for those 2 years, excellent secondary play for the most part for the Commodores in the last 10 or 15 years. Torrin McGaster's a guy to look out for. Oren Burks out of Vandy, coming into his junior season, had 3 picks last year and 52 tackles. Arian Penton out of Mizzou, a fine player with 5 career interceptions, 59 tackles. Anthony Sherrells at Mizzou as well, 64 tackles, 4 for loss, 6 passes defensed. Don't forget Chris Westerly, a guy at Kentucky that we'll be talking about, 36 tackles and 7 passes defensed. Also at safety at Kentucky, A.J. Stamps, who had 67 stops, a pick, and 8 passes defense. So deep position that kind of fills you out on safety with a few other guys, but also previews the cornerback position, which we'll probably have to hit next. So any more thoughts on defensive play in the SEC, guys?
I think I want to just have one question for Mike. We were talking about the safety position at Tennessee. Mike, how was Shoop coming in? Will that change the back end of Tennessee's defense?
On the back end side, Shoop prefers to play a much more traditional strong safety, free safety set. A lot of defensive coordinators are going to a left and right safety, and they're trying to combine. They want both safeties to have the same responsibilities on either half of the field. And of course, that's because when you look at the spread offenses that are gaining momentum, it's all about numbers and matchups. So once you split the safety position, make it left-right, then that forces the offense to make more decisions at the line of scrimmage. Shoop prefers the traditional strong safety, free safety. I think it will. I don't think it's going to change Tennessee's philosophy much. They've always ran that. But I think you'll see. I think the biggest change you're going to see from Shoop is the attitude. I think the strong safety in particular is going to be a lot more aggressive, and I think because of the defensive line that Tennessee has, the strong safety will be allowed to be a little bit more aggressive without compromising the back end, either the backside cornerback or the free safety in traditionally two deep coverage when you have a strong safety being aggressive.
Okay. Yeah, one more thing I'll add about Florida. It was, I think, probably one of the best assistant hires of the year was bringing in Torian Gray from Virginia Tech, their DB coach there, is now the DB coach at Florida. So it would be interesting to see if he throws in any of his, because Virginia Tech, I mean, they don't bring in the talent Florida does, but year after year, Virginia Tech was one of the nation's best secondaries. So now he gets to work with that Florida talent. It would be interesting to see. I mean, it's hard to say make that secondary much better, but, can he keep, of course he'll keep the Florida roots going, but can he, what will be his custom stamp on the Florida secondary is what I'm ready to see from Torian Gray.
Yeah, the two Virginia Tech corners from last season, Brandon Faison and also Kendall Fuller, NFL guys. So, yeah, they played exceptional defensive back play there under Bud Foster at Virginia Tech in particular. All right, this is SEC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Central Time Zone, talking top 5 safeties and cornerback position coming up next week. All right, guys, anything else before we sign off?
That's it for me.
I'm going to warn you guys about doing your homework for next week because I just pulled up our video from last year looking at the top 5 cornerbacks in the SEC. And pretty much across the board, those guys are all gone. So they're off to the next level. So we're going to have to dig next week when we look at the cornerback position. All right, from Mike LaValle from Last Word on Sports and also David Waters from SEC Breakdown, we will see you next week.